Thank you, Stephen, for inviting me, and thank you for being here. I appreciate being in London because I had been here a number of years ago, and yesterday when I was arriving, I still discovered that I know where the streets are and I know how to get along in London. So I'm happy being here, and I'm happy to presenting my work from a project that was conducted together the University of Cologne with the Institute for Employment Research in Nuremberg. And the project was about parents' employment during the COVID-19 crisis. And one aspect that we have been interested in was when the burden lifts. What happened when schools and daycare facilities reopened again? So let's get into the topic. Well, I think I don't have to talk a lot about the COVID-19 crisis and that it was a shock for individuals, and one shock or one containment measure included in many countries, not only in Germany, but in many countries all over the world, was the school closures and daycare facilities. And there was in many countries a controversial debate on the consequences of the closures, on the one hand for child development, but also what it meant for parents and for parents' employment, and in particular for mothers. So mothers have been in many aspects the focus of these debates. And what has also been, at least in Germany, controversially debated was, when is the right time to reopen schools again? So how can we balance the negative effects of closures on children and parents, but also how do they still contribute to the containment? So there was not only a debate on the closures, but also on reopenings. When is a good time to reopen schools again? So what we do here is we don't look at children, but we look at parents. We will mainly focus on parents' working hours, but we will also have a few analyses on life satisfaction. And what we also do in this paper is we concentrate on the onset of the COVID-19 crisis. So we're looking to summer 2020, so the first phase. Good. So if you look into the media, that's what I did this morning. There was a lot of debate on mothers, and that mothers have been hit harder by school closures. So women put careers hold to homeschooling, mothers do childcare, housework and job, and there's gender inequality in paid and unpaid work. So there is a association of school closures on women's employment. So that's been common sense at that time. School closures matter. So the research, and it's not only the media, but also research has shown that these closures led to an increased demand of childcare for parents because children had been at home, either because kindergarten closed or school closed, and there was this homeschooling task for parents. And that in turn led to a reduction in parental working hours. And this reduction of working hours of parents have been widely documented in the literature. I think you may have already encountered these results yourself. So there was this reduction of working hours at the onset of the pandemic. However, there were several parallel developments at that time, at April 2020 and May 2020. So for example, there had been closures in retail, in services, there had been closures in bars and restaurants, hospitality. There was a decline in overall economic activity because of closures all over the world. So there was a lot going on at that time that may have also affected working hours of parents and non-parents. So to come to a conclusion in what respect school closures and daycare closures actually affected parents' employment, we would have to take into account all these other parallel developments. So what the cause of school closures in this agglomeration of containment measures? And that's what we want to evaluate in that paper. To what extent do school and daycare closures have an impact on parents' working hours and life satisfaction? A short note, in Germany, unemployment was not much of an issue in the lockdown situation in April and March 2020. And this was because there was a governmental scheme, which was called short-time allowances, that allowed employers to reduce working hours of their employees. but still keeping them in the firm. So it's much about Germany, unemployment didn't increase, but rather working hours decreased because there was this possibility of allowances for those reducing working hours. So we're looking at working hours and life satisfaction. Good. So some theoretical thoughts. So we had this unexpected school closure. School closed, parents reduced working hours. So far, so good. However, what we are going to look at is we look at the other side of the coin. We look at the openings. So did the opening of school and daycare facilities lead to an increase of working hours of parents? So if the closures, alongside with all other containment measures, if the closures were causal for parents' working hours reduction, if this was true, then a reopening should lead to parents to resume working hours. Closures reducing, if there's a causal effect, then the opening of school would lead to an increase of parents' working hours. However, if the reduced working hours had been due to all the other pandemic-related containment measures, all the economic changes, then the opening of school shouldn't do much for parents' working hours, because all the other containment measures have been the cause for the reduction. So if the closures had not been the cause for parents reducing working hours, then reopening should also not matter a lot. And the same arguments can be applied to life satisfaction, the same story. So we have increased childcare demands because of the closures. That increases parents' stress, and that in turn affects parents' life satisfaction. So, and looking now at the openings, did the openings actually lead to an increase of parents' life satisfaction? Again, if the closures have been causal, then reopening should be mirrored in parents' increase in life satisfaction. Same story as I had been pointing out for working hours. And that's just the add-on. Main focus is on working hours, but we have been interested in life satisfaction as well. So where do we start? We had nationwide closures from mid-March 20, so all federal state, all over Germany, closed school at the 17th, respective 23rd of March in 2020. Immediately closure all over Germany. And these closures lasted until the end of May 2020, complete closures. However, from June on, several federal states started to reopen school and daycare facilities again. And the interesting thing is, these federal states did that on their own. So we have a variation of the timing of the reopenings, and we have a variation in the extent of reopenings. In some states, only some grades open, some school years open, then we have hybrid schooling, alternate schooling. So there was a lot of variation going on in the state with regard to the planning as well as to the extent of the openings. And that means we have variation in school opening, sorry for that, that we have this variation of opening across federal states, across timing and by extent of opening. And this is where we can step in. We can use this variation of reopenings to analyze the changes in working hours and life satisfaction. Because we have individuals living in different federal states that have been affected at different times from the openings. Good. How do we do that? We use the IAB High Frequency Online Personal Panel. It's called the HOPP study, Life and Work Situations in Times of Corona. And this is also combined with register data of unemployment biographies. And what is the HOPP data about? It's a monthly survey that started in May 2020. Monthly survey from there on until the end of 2020. And it includes questions on, for example, working hours before the crisis. So we can use this data set to examine our research question. What do we look at? We look at actual weekly working hours, so respondents were asked how much work last week. And we used the information that respondents gave before COVID. They were asked, actual workers' working hours before the outbreak of the pandemic. And we used the information given in June 2020. And for life satisfaction, we compare life satisfaction in May 2020 with life satisfaction in June 2020. For working hours, we look at individuals who have been employed before the pandemic, allows the comparison before COVID-19 and at the time of the interview. And for the life satisfaction, we look at individuals, if they've been employed or not, because we're interested in life satisfaction in these two ways. So the case numbers differ slightly. Good. How do we define parents? We define parents by those who have a child that is younger than 15 living in the household. Non-parents are those without children of this age. That could be childless, but it could also be individuals with children of age older than 15. We combine these two as non-parents, and we assume here that children with less than 15 require more childcare demands, homeschooling and so on, than older children. What we do, and we do at least for working hours, we look at workers in essential and non-essential jobs. Why do we do that? Because workers in essential jobs had access to childcare that non-essential workers didn't have. So that's why we also have at least a slight look at this group separately. What we do are fixed effects regression, but just to let you know, we also run some OLS regression with a lot of control variables just to check what we can see here. But analysis, the results I will present here, rely on fixed effects modules. So what do? We use the variation in the opening. How is the variation defined? As I said in the motivation part, we have this different regulations in the different German states about the extent and the timing of school and daycare reopening. What we did is we collected that data, exact data on which schools, which grades, which years, which whatever had been opened again from end of May on for each of the separate federal states in Germany. And we use the Federal States Ministry of Education Information, Federal Statistics Office, as well as press releases from that time, really to come to the exact date of the different regulations. Sometimes there was a stepwise process. So some grades opened first, then the next one and the next one. And we tried to get the data on all these steps of reopening. So, and what we do is we compare individuals, parents and non-parents, with regards to where they live, in which federal state they live. And we use the date of the interview. And by using the date of the interview, we could reconstruct whether or not school or daycare facilities were still closed in the week before the interview, which is varying for individuals. And we could also identify whether or not school and daycare facilities were already opened in the week before the date of the interview. What does opening mean? In our case, we speak of opening if every child in the state experienced at least some on-site schooling again. Versus closure means some children are still fully at home. So it's a kind of conservative treatment definition we choose here. So every child is at least some part of the day or the week at school again. That's when we speak of schools have reopened. That doesn't mean they're completely back at school, but at least there's no one still fully at home.
So it's basically non-closure. Is opening everything that's not defined as closed?
Yeah. Some children are full at home. Opening is
anything else.
Every child is at least one day or the other at school and daycare again.
The decision to reopen the schools might be correlated to the situation of the. And so
I'll come back to that. Good. So we have, this is our opening definition. So what do? We compare working hours of parents and life satisfaction for parents and non-parents living in treated and non-treated states. And states are not defined as states, but the weeks in respective states compared to the interview date. However, that's what you said. These federal states differ in several respects, in particular, whether or not they have been hit hard by the pandemic, how other closures, other containment measures are in place. So what we do is we use a difference in difference approach on the one hand, and I'll show you that in a minute. And we also use a different design. And I will explain that by using some graphs that hopefully make it more clear what we are doing. So what we are doing is we look at working hours of employed parents. So we have the pre-COVID situation, and what we assume is that if our hypothesis holds true, then in those states where we have this school and daycare closure in the week before, in this situation of the states, but in the individual situation of these individuals, they school working hours may have reduced. Whereas in those states, in those situations where the reopening is already in place, then the working hours may have recovered again compared to the pre-COVID situation. So this is the parental story. Schools closed, less working hours, school opened again, working hours have resumed. And then we do a difference in difference. We do the same for employed persons without children. And here we expect, as they don't have children, they should not be affected on whether or not schools have opened or not. So we assume that there is some reduction of working hours because of the other containment measures, restaurants, bars, blah, blah, blah. But they should not differ, at least not much, by whether or not schools are open, if they don't have any children in schooling or daycare age. Okay, and by comparing parents and non-parents and comparing the differences, we have parent side and we have the non-parent side, and we do the difference of the differences, we could make kind of causal, as always, some claims on whether or not school reopenings mattered for working hours. And this maybe answers your question, how we deal with this variation of different situations.
So I guess related to that, I imagine the school opening decisions also directly or to some extent determined by the COVID situation. And COVID can have a direct impact on the outcome you're interested in here, and COVID can impact parents and non-parents differently too. So in that sense, does that make sense? Like, is using a non-parent group counterfactual, if that's the case?
This is the approach we chose. Do you have a different one? This is the one with the red one we could take here in this.
I don't have one that's I can't study this because
I got the point that there might be still some systematic differences between this group with regard to the pandemic, but this is what we chose to at least have a look at how the school and daycare closures affect these two groups differently. Perhaps we can discuss that later in the discussion, what can be next, how can the paper be improved. Good, so that's what we do. We compare parents and non-parents and compare the situation of open school to still closed schools. Good, what are the results? Let's have a look at the parents' working hours and openings. So, and you see the picture mirrors what we expected. So we have a pre-COVID situation. And if we look at those who are in a situation where schools have already opened, their working hours are higher than those in a situation where schools are still closed. So there is a parents' resumption of working hours in a situation where schools are open again. So parents work significantly fewer work hours on average in June 2020 than before COVID. So we have a reduction for everyone, but in particular, this reduction is higher, working hours are lower, if schools are closed. So it seems to be the case that school openings matter for parents. If we look at employed persons without young children, we see they also work less than before COVID, have the economic change for everyone. However, if we compare the situation with and without school openings, it doesn't make much of a difference for those without children. School openings have only little impact on those without young children. There is some difference, but it's much less pronounced than for the parents. So, and if we run models, as we're just descriptive analysis showing the graphs, if we run models, what we see is, well, yes, we have the reduction of working hours for parents and for non-parents, but we're most, oops, here. The red one is parents and non-parents reduce the working times, comparing June and before COVID, but the openings have a positive effect on working hours for parents. Have this increase in situations where schools are open for parents, but not for non-parents, at least not significant. And finally, if we compare parents and non-parents, what we see is that there actually is a significant difference in the effect of openings when we compare parents and non-parents. Parents, it does make a difference whether schools are open or closed.
1.5, do I read that as 1.5 hours
Yes.
a week?
Yeah, between 1.5 and 2.
Which is quite small.
Yes, it is. And I'll point to that later in the discussion. I would have expected it to be higher. But at least we see something, but the school openings did not really matter for resuming working hours, at least not in the short-term perspective from 1 week to the other. But at least in the short-term perspective, it still makes a difference if the school have been opened or closed in the week before. So, good. What about is men and women? For both, we see a positive effect of openings, but the effects are not significant in this case if we look at mothers and fathers separately. Finally, if we compare the essential and non-essential workers, we see that for essential workers, there's only a small effect here, and it's not significant, meaning they have access to childcare, so they are not much affected by this opportunity, by this reopening for all, whereas for non-essential workers, indeed, there is a positive effect, however, it's not significant. So then we did a lot of robustness checks, whatever you can think of. So we did post-treatment selection bias due to job loss, or we did separate analysis for those who may have lost their job completely, which wasn't the case. It wasn't observed in many cases, but we still checked for that. We checked the treatment variable. We used weights in different kinds. We excluded cases with a long survey duration, so if they have been interviewed for more than 5 days. We also excluded cases that have been interviewed during a break. In some federal states, we have a Pentecost break, but it's only in Bavaria and partly in Baden-Württemberg. So we excluded those to make sure that reopenings are really happening there, and it's not in the public holiday phase. And we also checked if we look at the federal states separately, if one particular state drives the result, but the results remain robust in these different checks here. Good. that was about the working hours. What we also did as a kind of add-on, so that's a paper we wrote on working hours. But what we also were looking at, and we're not sure if we're going to make another paper out of that, but at least we have looked at opening and life satisfaction. And these are preliminary results because we're not sure if we want to continue with this aspect, just replicating, just doing the same paper with another Y variable, or if it's just nice to have a look at it. So far, it's nice to have a look at it. Opening and life satisfaction. We know the story is the same and the approach is the same. We have life satisfaction in May. And then we compare that with June. And we expect that for those where schools have already opened, the increase in life satisfaction is higher compared to parents who are in a situation where schools are still closed. They have the stress and all the children at home. So same story, same approach. For those non-parents, also assume that there is an increase in life satisfaction, but this increase is expected not to vary with school openings. Good. So what do we find here? We find a small and only marginally significant difference in the effect of opening for parents compared to non-parents. So there is some positive effect, but it's small on a 0 to 10 scale. Father's life satisfaction is not affected by the openings. However, for mothers, we do find a small significant effect of school openings on the life satisfaction in the week thereafter, after the opening. Good. So what have you seen? You've seen that closures matter. And the contribution of our paper is maybe a scientifically interesting one, but not for the public, because everybody thought schools matters. Well, they do, and that's what we show, but we're able to show how much schools matter, for the opening of schools matters, for increase of working hours, increase of life satisfaction. And what we find is, yes, there is an effect of the openings on parents' working hours and life satisfaction beyond all other related changes in the economy and in individuals' life situation. But what we see is that the faster school openings, do have an effect, but this effect is not as large as I would have expected before I would have run the analysis. Because what we see is about 1.5 to 2.5 hours per week that the increase amounts to in the week after the school openings, depending on model stratification. With regard to life satisfaction, that's even less pronounced. The increase, if you would have asked me, I would have expected it to be greater than it actually is here in our analyses. It's only 0.5 points on this 0 to 10 scale. So life satisfaction increases with opening, but it's not that the burden really lifts for parents and that they start dancing again once the children are at school again. Conclusions. What we see is, at least from a policy perspective, yes, childcare matters for parents, has some impact on parents' employment and life satisfaction. So if you introduce childcare facilities, if you in schools, that does something with parents' employment and parents' life satisfaction. And what we also see, that's also surprising result here, that we don't see much of a gender difference in working hours, and only a slightly increase of mother's life satisfaction, but not father's with regard to life satisfaction in the course of the year. Good. That's it. Thank you.